Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. I don't know if you can all hear me, but if you could confirm on the chat section or just speak out so that I'm sure that I'm audible on the other side. Thank you. My name is Ivy Cachero. I'm part of the cybersecurity team as an account manager for the META region, basically handling customer-facing engagements to support in advisory for technology and consultancy services that Ingram Micro is offering in the region. Before we could start, I just want to be sure that we're all I'm clear on everybody's end, that you can be, if somebody could just confirm that you could hear me, that would be great. And we could start in the next 2 minutes or so. Also, just for reference, I'd want to highlight that this session is recorded for the purpose of privacy as well. As well, during the session, in case you will not be speaking, I would advise that you switch off your mics so that we avoid any interruptions. And if you've got any questions, you can flag them on the chat box, and then we can highlight them as we go. And then maybe after the session, then we can have a session to probably ask questions, engage. Anything that you'd want me to address as we go, you can just put in the comments in the chat section, and I'll address as we go as well. Praveen, can you confirm that you could hear me?
I can hear you, Ivy. Very good and clear. Oh. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I believe we have an audience enough to start. We're 16 minutes into the allocated time for the session. Basically, just to reintroduce myself, I am Ivy Cachero, part of the cybersecurity account managers team, basically handling customer-facing advisory for our technology and consultancy services. Basically, what we'll be talking about today is the idea of compliance and security, and how most of us or most organizations and individuals have either one way view to it, or assumptions to security being compliance and compliance being security. And maybe throughout the session, I can be able to demystify this for you and probably give guidelines as to how you may be able to support your organizations to achieve both compliance and security. I'll go through the introduction of the session, which is pretty much what we're doing right now, give the differences between compliance and security, go through the overview of the cybersecurity frameworks that most organizations are keen to look into right now, and then also just dive into ISMS and specifically looking into ISO 27K framework, the implementation of it, and the benefits as well. So the idea of achieving security and compliance basically focuses on ensuring that we secure information assets, avoid damage and protect and detect theft of our company's assets. Basically, to have proper protection, companies need to understand that compliance is not the same thing as security, and however, security is also a big part of compliance, essentially. So to be able to ensure that we have compliance, I think the good way to look at it would be to ensure that we have security, because with security, then compliance as well is looked into. So basically, computer security is also known as cyber security or IT security, in the protection of, which is the protection of information systems from theft or damage, essentially for hardware, software, as well as information on them. This also is to also be keen on disruption or misdirection of the services that those assets or softwares or information is supposed to be providing to the organization. Compliance is not necessarily the primary concern or prerogative for most security teams. And if you look at it in most organizations, there's usually a difference between the compliance and the security team. Although this being the case, it's usually a critical business requirement to look into. I'd want to go into just giving an overview of a recent case that happened in 2013. Sorry for that. The incident that happened in 2013 for the target was ended up having a security breach, data breach in the organization, and the implications that this had on the organization in terms of reputation, in terms of what they lost in terms of business, which was huge, keeping in mind that organizations of this size you would assume would have the finances and the assumption that they're a huge organization, big corporation, would have all the technical technology that is required to ensure that they are secure, as well as be compliant with the basic typical PCI compliance regulations, considering that they have a lot of transaction with card holding data. So the average loss of this incident was about 40 million in the number of credit and debit card that the thieves had stolen. This is between the period of November 27th and December 15th of 2013. And then 70 million of the number of records stolen that included the names and addresses and email addresses and phone numbers of the customers from Target as well. Keeping in mind the huge concern of PII, this was a huge thing for them. 46%, they had about 46% drop in the fourth quarter of sales for 2013 compared to the year before, keeping in mind that this is usually a high shopping season because of the Christmas and the festivity season it is. There was 200 million estimated dollar cost of the credit unions and community banks that they had to incur in terms of reissuing of the credit cards that needed replacement. So, I mean, if you look at it, this is just a minute aspect to how much this cost the organization. There's the implication that there was a change in management, the cost that this implicated to the organization, and many other factors that were considered during this time. Basically, this was just to give an overview and just show that a company of that size had compliance of some degree, we would like to assume, but still it ended up having a breach. Then if that's the case, what do we then understand as compliance? Compliance is the focus on the kind of data that is handled and stored by a company, and what regulatory requirements apply to that specific, to it for protection. Essentially, the key aspects of IT governance are availability, integrity, and confidentiality. And if you've attended majority of our webinars, this has been highlighted in majority of them, because the essence of security is all these three pillars. And if these are areas, if you look at it, the integrity that of data, that the data is not being tampered with, that this data is only accessed by those that are supposed to access it, and that this data is available when required by the organization or whoever needs to be handling any processing within the organization, are key elements. And as you can see, this is the same, all these aspects were affected when we looked into the targets breach that happened in 2013. The IT governance website actually gave a good overview as to comparison between compliance and security, and this here is just a diagrammatic analysis of it. And as you can see, compliance majorly focuses on regulatory frameworks, policies, how to handle documentation, standards, and risks, while security is more keen on the physical controls, network access, business processes, authentication mechanisms, and security of IT environment, which, if you look at it from this point of view, explains why there is usually the split in in roles when organizations are looking for resources to manage this. So you'll find that the security aspect is only being handled by IT, and you'll find that there is a completely different entity, that department that focuses on compliance. The struggle to be able to integrate these two as one is usually the major challenging aspect, but that shouldn't be the case, because the two in hand are supposed to ensure the full security, the security of an organization, and also ensure that organizations don't end up penalized for not being able to meet the regulatory frameworks and requirements that are set in place for the government within the locations they operate, as well as the guidelines into which the business entities that they fall under, be it healthcare, finance, or corporates. So frameworks for compliance and cybersecurity basically provide a common language which can be used at all levels of organizations to promote a more secure and efficient business practice, and at the same time ensuring that the enterprises meets its legal responsibilities to both its consumers, the industry governing bodies, and as well as the regulatory bodies within which they operate. There are three different types of cybersecurity frameworks. If we look at it from a breakdown, we have frameworks that focus on control frameworks, program frameworks which more focus on development of programs, and then risk frameworks which basically focus on how to properly provide risk analysis for their organizations, and how to ensure the best practice for implementation of evaluating risk as well. An example of the top cybersecurity frameworks that we have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which I believe this was, if you had an opportunity to attend Pravin's webinar last week, he basically looked into this as well. The payment card industry data security standard, which is basically what the example that I gave about Target was supposed to be following, and most organizations that actually store payment card data for its customers. We've got COBIT, we've got HIPAA, we've got the Center of Internet Security and Critical Security Controls, European Union, which the previous few weeks Pravin has also gone deep into explaining this while celebrating the 2-year anniversary, and also the ISO 27K, which is what I would like to focus on basically towards in today's session. I just wanted to ask something that would be of key interest. What do you realize that all the company logos that are displayed here have in common? If anybody can be keen to share or give their thoughts on what they think these are. Anybody? I'm hoping to just get 1 or 2 people to, they have all been penalized for compliance violation, penalized, okay. Somebody else? Or hacked even. Okay, font, okay. So essentially, just to go back into this, the main what they have in common is actually they're all Fortune 500 companies. They are all ISO 27K certified and all have a global growth rate of about 20%. And to ISO, they have become the de facto standard for information security management certifications, basically. Reason being, the reputation that this certification actually being ISO 27K brings to them as an organization in terms of how they're able to transact globally is a huge factor into it. But I'll just go into explaining what the ISMS what ISMS gives in terms of privilege to these organizations. So basically, what is ISMS? It is information security management that describes the controls an organization needs to implement to ensure that it is sensibly protecting the confidentiality, availability, as well as integrity of assets, basically from threats and from vulnerabilities. As I'd mentioned earlier, these are the key areas that the compliance and the cybersecurity should be looking into in totality. For this and other reasons, every organization that implements an ISMS must do so against the results of a risk assessment, basically keeping in mind that these are just guidelines and an overview of the controls that an organization should look into. The predetermining factor of what controls to apply actually then are considered after a risk assessment, whose methodology and findings should have been approved by the board of directors. This is just to ensure that the risks have also been evaluated by the management to ensure that they align with the business practices of the business goals of the organization. Basically, not just to focus on security while not evaluating what the benefits and evaluating what those risk implications would be to an organization. So the standard takes basically a risk-based approach, which is what I was explaining, to information security, and it requires organizations to identify information security risks and then take appropriate controls to tackle them. So basically, the risk-based approach will basically create customized controls for companies' critical vulnerabilities and also defeat attacks at a lower overall cost, meaning you prioritize risks that are more have a higher impact on the organization, and then find ways to reduce the risks for those that don't. From the 20 biggest breaches, as reported by PECB, on average, each one had affected about 35 million people. The company that was affected the most was actually eBay, followed by Anthem and JP Morgan. This is just an analysis of the amount of records that were affected in graphical format, as had shared by PECB. And you can see Target had around 110, close to 120, 83 from JP Morgan, 78.8. And it keeps going. You can see the trend with the rest of the organizations as well. It would be good to actually just do a research on these organizations if you haven't, to just understand the background stories of the data breaches and what caused them actually. So none of the companies that were hacked were certified against ISO 27K at the time of the data breach. This is just an analysis that BECB had done at that time. So means the basic guidelines that was ISO provides, basically these organizations hadn't taken into consideration, not to mean that there were no other controls that they had in place, but just from an analysis point of view. Among the hacked companies were companies that offer information security services as well, which we would assume that companies that offer information security services would have all the technology and all the resources required to ensure that they are secure enough to avoid this kind of incidents within their organizations, which in this scenario proved different. The companies have to consider that every aspect of the operation, including all controls, in order to establish a proper information security procedure. So within the ISO 27K framework, training, technical practices, are among the suggested activities to look at closely. And I will just get into just explaining some of the breakdown of the controls in overview. There are about 114 controls in the ISO 27K annex listed in Annex A, and the latest revision being the 2013, as compared to the ones that were before, which was 133. But if you look at it, you can see that We have about 7% of this. The breakdown shows clearly 7% of these are based on related to legal issues, 13% are related to control, physical security. We've got 54 related to IT controls, 5% related to human resources, and 21 related to organizational issues. Basically, this means with the guidelines that you have from ISO 27K, you are able to cover a broader perspective into your IT risk evaluation, and therefore being able to set in place the right controls that are more keen to your organization and customized to the risk level at which your organization is able to tolerate. A breakdown of the 14 controls is we've got the A5, which is the security policy. Organizational information security being an element, human resource being an element that is looked into, asset management, access control, cryptography, physical and environmental security, operational security, communication security, systems acquisition, development and maintenance, supplier relationships, information security, incident management, information security aspects for business continuity and management, as well as compliance. So if you look at it, this also keeps in mind the compliance aspect, and you can see it's integrating to all of the, I would say, the legacy view that we have on security point of view from a technical point. So it has the human element and people element to it. It has the technology element to it, and it also has a process element to it, which is the reason why ISO is a recommended standard while creating a framework for your organization, security framework. So the essence of ISO 27K, Annex A basically gives you a perfect overview of which controls you can apply, but you also have to realize that it would be important that you understand that there's the implementation aspect to these controls, and the implementation is actually usually set aside on a different document, which is the ISO. This is why they developed the ISO 27002. The advantage is the fact that you can be able to tailor and custom make these controls to what your organization finds applicable, so that you don't have to invest resources on the ones that aren't necessarily relevant to your organization, which for most organizations, we have set in place budgets, but we in most cases focus on, we work on a more, what would I call it, an approach that is influenced by external factors and not necessarily based on an overview of an organization. A typical example is how we would necessarily just go for technology, probably just listed on Gartner because they have been mentioned to be providing a certain area of security that is needed. But if you do a risk analysis of your organization, probably that technology doesn't apply. Or an amazing salesperson would probably make a pitch about a technology, but when you do a risk analysis of your organization and evaluate whether it's a valid investment, this is usually not considered. So it's usually not just about whether budgets are available to buy technology, but ensuring that we are mitigating risk or by reducing, accepting, or getting rid of them, or or getting rid of the risk as well. So the ISO 27002 basically is created to just give guidelines for organizational information security standards and information security management practices that enables you to select, implement, and manage controls, taking into consideration the organization security risk environment. This is why before getting into the implementation of this, it is usually highly recommended that a risk assessment is taken on your organization to be able to know what elements to prioritize. I cannot emphasize the importance of actually having a risk assessment done, keeping in mind most people assume that risk assessments are just for big organizations, but I'd also suggest that SMB and SME organizations would need to consider this to be able to ensure that they effectively use their resources for implementation. So basically, ISO 27002 is designed to be used by organizations that, one, select controls within the process of implementing an information security management system, either based on ISO 27001 or other, implement commonly accepted information security controls, or are in the process of developing their own information security guidelines as well. So the difference between ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 is that ISO 27001 is more of a summary about each control, as it gives just basic one sentence description of each control. But ISO 27002 is just an exact same of ISO 27001, but it gives a more detailed explanation on how you would be able to implement the controls that you've selected from ISO 27001. So this also just gives a more practical approach to implementation of ISO 27001. So mitigating risks using ISMS, basically, many have chosen to mitigate the risk by implementing ISMS as a tool in the organization. And this is because ISMS is basically the system of processes, documents, technology, and the people that help organizations manage, monitor, and improve their organization's security all in one place. Basically, the training, the documentation, the policies and procedures and guidelines that are all set in place are all systemized, created into and implemented into the system while considering ISMS as well. So basically, this would simplify an organization that probably doesn't have the competency or doesn't have the resources to design everything from scratch, or are struggling with knowing how to go about starting to implement ISMS and ensure that they're meeting their compliance and security regulations. Any questions to this point? If I'm too fast, please feel free to just let me know. Any question, any thoughts, any? Yes, Moss? Okay, great. I'll slow down for sure. Any points you'd like me to reiterate, explain more in detail based on the few slides that I just explained earlier? Probably that would help to give a deeper perspective of this. Okay. So I'll just proceed then, presuming that there are no questions. So how do we create an ISO compliant and a secure ISMS? The 9 steps to create an ISO 27001 compliant ISMS. One is you have to come up with a project mandate, appointing a project leader who will work with all other members of staff to create a project mandate, because keeping in mind that the implementation of ISO 27K is more from an analysis of risk based, more importantly, based on those that are actually interacting with the information and the systems that you're considering to review the risks of. So ensuring that you have all the key persons that are involved is really important, and having someone to ensure that they organize and collaborate with these teams effectively is important. Second is to initiate a project, adopt a methodology for which you anticipate for the ISMS as well, and then identify a baseline security criteria, basically create a management framework. And this is also basically based on the analysis that you will have done from doing a risk assessment as well. It's key to understand that ISO is just baseline, but you will need to be able to identify what works for your organization and custom make this accordingly. Organizations should also identify their core security needs. These are the requirements and the corresponding measures or controls that are necessary to conduct business. Basically identifying the key concerns that the business is key to ensuring that they protect. What are the most risk assets and the key things that the organization is looking into securing, and then as well align those to what the regulatory bodies and external factors that affect your business as well. So basically then develop a risk management process that allows organizations to broadly define their own risk management process, then create a risk treatment plan. So basically this is the process of building the security controls that will protect your organization's information assets, how you'll be able to mitigate these risks once you identify them. How will you be able to measure and monitor the results and review the results once the implementation of the ISMS has been done? Because it has to meet the initial information security objectives of the organizations as they had been set in the beginning. And this is why it is also important to ensure that the objectives are set first before the implementation, so that there is something that we can be able to measure and monitor against, keeping in mind that this is also a continuous process as well. Then if you're an organization that requires to achieve the certification for any reasons because of the company's objectives, then at this point it would be feasible for one to consider certification from a reputable organization approved to offer the certifications. Just to keep in mind that ISMS focuses on PDCA, and PDCA basically is it's a cycle that a business management is a business management method that basically focuses on 4 main steps that should continuously be implemented as change is considered in the company. So basically, at every single time, a risk assessment is only as good as at that single time at which a risk assessment was done. And therefore, it is important that every single time that we have any changes or adjustments into the organization, that we review the risks once more to ensure that we have covered the vulnerabilities that have been exposed once the changes have been made. Most organizations actually stick to their initial certifications, which usually don't give a clear picture as to where the organizations stand from a security standpoint, keeping in mind if an organization was certified about a year ago and there's been a lot of changes within their infrastructure, business operations and procedures. This also affects the change and the exposure to risk that the organization has. So this is why it has to be a continuous process. So the four steps that the PDCA considers is basically plan, do, check, and act. So basically, you plan the objectives, you do, you continuously check, and then act on them. So means establish the ISMS itself, alongside which policies, objectives, and procedures for risk management. Then basically do refers to implementing the actual functioning ISMS, including implementing information security policies and procedures and so forth based on the risk assessment that you've done. Then continuously checks involves monitoring, reviewing of the ISMS and measuring the process performance compared to the policies and objectives that had been set in place. Act is the process of updating and improving the ISMS. It may mean undertaking corrective, preventive actions on the basis of internal audit and management review. For organizations that probably then don't have teams that are big enough to continuously do this, this is usually the essence as to why it is necessary to consider a service provider that would be able to offer you this sort of services to ensure that you're continuously monitoring your risk and managing your risks effectively. So what does ISO 27K certification basically validate for an organization, and why is it actually important? One is protected information from getting, it validates that the information is protected from getting into unauthorized hands because of the controls that are stated in the ISO 27K. Also, it ensures that information is accurate and can only be modified by authorized users. So this actually then talks about the integrity aspect of the security, the 3 security aspects that we look into. It also proves that you've assessed the risks and mitigated the impact of a breach, and then being independently assessed on an international standard based on industry's best practices also just is one of the values that ISO 27K brings. So basically, in a nutshell, it just demonstrates that you have identified the risk, assessed them, and the implications that they have, and put in place systemized controls to limit any damage to the organization. In case just for there is, I think there's some background noise. If you are not speaking, I'd recommend that you just switch off your mic just to avoid any background noise as well. So the implication is that you've identified risks, assessed, and you have now systemized controls that either limit any damage to the organizations. The idea is also to understand that this doesn't mean that your organization is completely safe and will not be attacked, but it just means that you've taken preventive measures to either reduce the risk or mitigate the risks as well. So benefits of it would be increased reliability and security for systems and informations, improve customer and business partner confidence. If from certain organizations, it is a key requirement that before you interact or do business with them from a global scale, that they require that you should be ISO certified as well. This doesn't necessarily mean that all organizations should be certified, but at least consider the controls that are probably shared from this framework. It increases the business resilience, keeping in mind that it's you have proactive measures into incident management and business continuity, that controls that are also factored in the ISO 27K framework. Alignment with customer requirements, keeping in mind that it guarantees that customer information is protected, and hence customers are more confident in the expectations they have out of you from an organization. Improved management process and integration within corporate risk strategies. Basically, this is just to iterate that there's more synergy between compliance, senior management, as well as the technology operational point of business. I don't know if I have a few things to note. Basically, is that achieving ISO 27001 is not a guarantee that information breaches will never occur. But however, by having a robust system in place, risks will be reduced, and disruption and costs would be kept to the minimum. So basically, I went through some of the stages previously, but it is I would want to emphasize that assessing the potential risks to your business and identifying areas that are vulnerable is really key, and also identifying that your risk assessment is as accurate as at the point in time of which you did the risk assessment. This is why this is is something that you need to be doing on a regular basis to actually review your current state. The same thing applies to all other technical assessments that we do that are included as part of the risk assessment from the technical assessments that are offered as well. So I would just want to probably conclude by saying that most people focus on compliance because it gives guidelines onto how to implement security. But it's important to understand that without focusing on the risks that your specific organization is exposed to, basically means if you follow compliance only, compliance gives a baseline, which means most people only go for the bare minimum that is required to achieve our compliance recognition from these frameworks. But it's important to know that making your security just good enough for security compliance is essentially meaningless when it comes to genuine cyber threats from attackers, which access to sophisticated tools and techniques. I mean, attackers are beyond, they've understood the basics for compliance. So you have to go above and beyond by understanding where your business sits, the risks that and vulnerabilities that your organization is set to experience, and then based on that, customize the controls for the purpose of securing your organization. A risk to one organization is a benefit to another organization. So this is why this is very key. How can Ingram Micro help? From a consultancy point of view, now that I explained about ISO, we have managed to do risk assessment and as well as get a few organizations certified within this region as well for ISO 27K, which means then we guided them through taking the risk-based approach to implementing controls for their organizations, be it one specific area, data center approach, setting up of your SOC against this compliance regulation. And it could be from whatever perspective these organizations were looking into having themselves certified, but we ensured that we took them through each of the steps and provided the services required from audit, gap analysis, providing the remediation support, and then certification assistance is what we provided. So we do this for all of the majority of the cybersecurity frameworks. Today I just focused on ISO 27K, but we are able to do the same for PCI, NIST, NISA, ISR, and SAMA, ADSIC, and also right now we've got the Abu Dhabi regulation for healthcare as well, ADICS, which is also something that if you're in the healthcare sector, it's the regulations that are set in place by the Dubai government the Abu Dhabi government to follow for healthcare. So we've got other services, and if in most of these regulations, they insist on ensuring that certain technical assessments are covered, of which this is where we have an all in-house team that focuses on providing the consultancy, as well as the technical assessments from public discovery reports, database security assessment, digital forensics. In most cases, the most on demand, I would say, is the vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Reason being is because this is key highlighted in most of the compliance frameworks as well. And also just sets, it usually gives a better picture of vulnerabilities in general for an organization. So other than that, we've also got the managed security services. So just to be able to elevate and probably meet some of the ISO 27K recommendation on controls, despite the size of your organization, you can still be able to mitigate some of your risks with the controls that are recommended by outsourcing some of your services to a managed security service provider, and Ingram Micro happens to be one of those. So we provide the SOC services, which means in our SOC services, we have digital forensics included, malware protection, fraud monitoring, threat hunting, threat intelligence, incident response, and intrusion detection, log management. The reason why I say SOC is because most organizations have actually realized that investing in technology to set up their own SOC is quite costly. but it is also key to be able to have a proactive approach into mitigating your risks, which is also part of majority of the cybersecurity compliance frameworks. So we are able to offer this as well as an organization. We provide governance services as well, from helping organizations come up with a cybersecurity strategy, cybersecurity operating model, as well as data classification services that most customers would be looking into to identify where what data do they have, where is their data stored, the criticality or the criticality of the data they have stored in their environments. We're able to provide this, as well as then provide the relevant resources to mitigate or ensure that security is maintained. These are just from a service point of view, but we also have the technology element to provide an all-in-house. The main reason why I think Ingram Micro would stand strong when it comes to providing this compliance and risk assessment is because being known for being a technology distributor, and keeping in mind that now we've got the understanding and the expertise of consultants in-house that provide compliance for a compliance perspective, we're able to offer solutions to organizations that are not just for the point of sale, but also by ensuring that we offer solutions that have been evaluated also from a risk point of view. So it's key also to, if you're a partner or if you are from any of our internal teams, to just consider the risk assessment element and gap assessment services that we offer, while positioning some of the technology that you would like to position to your customers, because then this helps justify the reason as to why the customer would need the technology. I think I'm now done with the many slides that I had to go through. If you have any questions, this would be a great time. Any clarification you would need me to go through. So I have questions. ISO 27002, is it compulsory for MSSP, service provider, web giants, telcos? From a certification point of view, organizations management would be able to probably put a perspective to whether they would need it or not. But being able to apply the controls, I wouldn't say it's a matter of if it's compulsory. It's just they're just guidelines basically. If you'd want to ensure that you're having an all-round perspective into evaluation of your investment from a cybersecurity point of view, then the ISO controls would be good. I would say it would be good for telcos or most customer-facing entities that have a lot to do with end user data and the likes, or a lot of collaboration with different service entities. It is key just to show the credibility to how efficient and how secure your organization is. It just gives the assurance that you're more proactive from a cybersecurity point of view, keeping in mind that there's the high risk for security is. Also keeping in mind that an organization being ISO certified, and the organizations that they deal with are probably not ISO certified, a breach in one organization because of the interlinking systems could cause a breach in another organization. This is just essentially why certain organizations are actually keen to demanding that the organizations that they work with have meet a certain level of security. Okay, I will be able to share the slides as well for reference, and the video link if you'd want to go through it. But more requests that I go through the slides once more. I could do this from the top. Have any points? I will just run through it. If there's anything that you'd want addressed, I would be able to highlight that. I'm unable to actually jump in, see both screens, the chat screen and yeah, so I don't know. If there are any other questions as well, I'm just open to that as well. The compliance aspect, basically the key aspects of IT governance, availability, integrity, and confidentiality. That is essentially everything I was iterating through every slide, but basically in different ones probably. The key differences. These are the general cybersecurity frameworks that most people are keen on. Confidentiality, availability, and integrity. I believe that Praveen has done a session on this. I could probably share maybe the link to that session with regards to risk-based security. Although I think he focused on NIST framework, but it will also be, it gives a perspective also to this. How many number of days training for ISO from Ingram? I think I would need to confirm this from Praveen. Praveen, are you able to confirm if you're still on call?
Yeah, it's thank you, Abby. It's 2 days, Aline. The training for ISO. I'm sorry, the training for ISO is 5 days actually. It's not 2 days. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can also I mean, if it's for a specific organization, we could be able to offer, I mean, the proposal could be set in place for a specific organization. Just communicate to us directly. You can send an email to me or to the cybersecurity meter email as well, and then you could be able to get the information from there as well. Or you can directly just send your details to me on chat, and I can send it to you. Just Ivy. So basically, we could be able to also offer some of your customers, if we have partners on call, we could be able to offer your partners, your end users, the IT management, basically the training to be able to probably strategize and have a perspective on how to build this for their organizations as well, if they're not keen to probably outsource because they have in-house resources. But also from a risk assessment point of view, it's also keen to do it from externally. Okay. Anybody else with questions? Praveen, is the certification requires to be renewed?
Yes, once an organization is certified, they'll have to renew the certification as well. Every year we have to have surveillance audits, and then every 3 years, I think the certification audit has to be carried out.
Yeah.
I hope this helps, Aline.
Okay. Just Abdul Rahman, are you asking about the training from as an implementer, you mean individual, or from an organization point of view? Abdul Rahman? Oh, okay, okay, noted. Any other questions? Things you'd probably want me to, I mean, I would send the presentation once more. Maybe you could listen to the explanation that I gave. The slides were too many, so I had to make sure that I cover everything. Okay, Abdul Rahman, thank you. I'll keep that in mind, and after the session, I'll ensure that we share the material with you. Got 2 more minutes. Any questions, any concerns that you'd want us to address? I hope the session was valuable. Thank you, Ali and Sabir Patel. Thank you for joining the session. I really appreciate your time. Again, for those who joined late, my name is Ivy Cachero. I'm part of the account management team with the cybersecurity, basically doing solution advisory for end users. So if you need any support with regards to positioning technology, as well as consultancy services, I would be glad to help with this as well. Yes, the lecture is recorded. Risk not mitigated. Patel, I'm not quite sure what, and after ISO certification, what if it's breached? Also, basically, just to, and this is what I mentioned earlier, being ISO certified doesn't mean that you will not get breached. It just means you have reduced you've reduced your risk and also taken the necessary precautions. There's no 100% bulletproof for cybersecurity protection, basically. But basically, you'll have reduced the risks. That is, if you actually did a proper risk assessment and ensured that the implementation, the mitigation and the acceptance of some of the risks has been considered and approved by management. So basically, maybe low cost for some of the risks that the organization would be able to incur. Hence the reason why it's really, I mean, most people do a risk assessment, but because they assume that the QA would be able to pick a lot of information by himself, a lot of information is missed and not shared by the to the QA. And also this also affects the results of a risk assessment. And also then this would mean the implementing of the controls will also be affected. So it's really key to ensure that an efficient risk assessment is done and collaboration from all parties, especially in the organization, are involved in this. Does ISO entity take responsibility? Any terms and conditions? I wouldn't say so. They just provide a standard. You being certified just means you've met a certain standard. That's essentially what it means. It doesn't mean you're bulletproof. So there's still work to be done from a lot of responsibility lies on the customer's end, not from ISO. You're welcome. Anybody else with a question? We're 2 minutes over time, and if there are no any other questions or concerns, if you've got any questions that come up or requirements that you'd probably need our help to address, feel free to share an email. The link will be shared the same way we shared the invite. So we will share the link after the session for the webinar. Yes, I can share the presentation as well. Awesome. Great. Thank you, Ashwanik. Ashwanik. Yeah, I hope I said your name right. Yes, and if you have any questions with regards to the presentation, or you'd like me to share this with any of your customers personally, probably focus on specific elements for that specific customer, I would be able to do that, as well as with the help of Praveen, who's part of the consultancy team involved in this. Thank you, Ashwanik. Okay, great. I believe if anybody else still requires any information shared, just, you can still continue to share the information in the chat. I'll probably give another 2 minutes for any additional questions that we have. And I can probably say this is, it was lovely having you guys on the session, and have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you, Ali. One more minute, guys. Once again, I'd really want to say thank you for joining the session and taking your time to be with us. I really appreciate it. I'm humbled to be able to share the insights that I have with you guys. Thank you. I'll be ending the session here. Once again, have a lovely evening and the rest of the day. Stay productive.